So as I said, hello and welcome to Self-Care, Your First Priority with Vesna Antwan, BA 95. Before we begin, we would like to take this moment to acknowledge those affected by the tragic events in Nova Scotia earlier this week, as well as to equally express gratitude to our healthcare workers and to everyone who is working selflessly on the front lines to help surmount the current COVID-19 crisis. We are hearing from a lot of you, members of our alumni community, who are asking about how you can support students in this difficult time. The greatest area of need is the economic, physical, and mental well-being of our students. Concordia recently announced the launch of a $500,000 COVID-19 emergency student relief fund to help alleviate economic hardships. So if you are in a position to support the Student Relief Fund, you can do so at engage.concordia.ca/donate. And the designation is the COVID-19 Emergency Student Relief Fund. You can also make a difference by volunteering with the Concordia Live Center to help seniors combat social isolation, among other volunteer opportunities. With that said, I'm so pleased that you're taking the time to join us today. In an unbelievably short period of time, our lives have been dramatically transformed. We have new daily routines, perhaps more people relying on us. We know that many of you are at home with your kids right now, and as a result, new and very real stressors. Globally, we are dealing with uncertainty over every aspect of life, and it is at times like this that we need to remember to take care of ourselves too. This session is hosted by Concordia University's Alumni Relations as part of our See You at Home virtual programming series. My name is Olivia Picciarelli, and I'm the Alumni Officer of External Partnerships here at Concordia. I'm also joined today by my colleague, Christina Ramsey, who's the Alumni Officer of Global Networks, and together we will be moderating the chat environment. And I will gladly relay your questions to our speaker. First, a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this session and we'll share it with you in the coming weeks. Next, a little bit about the Zoom webinar platform. So once again, the third icon is the chat box, and where we encourage you to enter general comments as well as questions for our speaker, which we will get to towards the end of the presentation. This session is designed for your learning, so we appreciate your active participation throughout today's session. And now a little bit about our speaker. Vesna Antwan is an internationally certified personal and professional coach who helps soul-seeking individuals find their way back to themselves and their inner compass. Vesna specializes in reconnecting her clients with the things that make their heart sing. In her transformational coaching practice, she coaches the whole person, the mind, body, spirit, and guides her clients in turning their hopes and dreams into reality by using approaches of mindfulness, self-love, and compassion. On top of her regular coaching offerings, Vesna also conducts workplace wellness workshops on topics such as self-care, boundaries, and burnout prevention. In today's webinar, Vesna will offer practical tools for participants to ensure well-being at home, at work, and beyond. Audience, don't worry if you can no longer see us as I turn it over to Vesna, because she has prepared a lovely presentation for us all to follow along to. So now, without further ado, let's jump right in, and I'll pass it over to you, Vesna.
So thank you, Olivia. Thank you, Christina. And thank you so much to the Alumni Relations Office for inviting me to be with you today. It's such a pleasure to give back to my beloved Concordia community and to discuss a topic that is really near and dear to my heart. So I would like to welcome you to today's webinar on self-care. Attending this session is a lovely act of self-care, so I'd like to give you all some virtual high fives for taking time out of your day for being here. Self-care is the thread that runs throughout not only my work as a coach, but in my personal life as well. 4 years ago, I experienced a pretty significant burnout, and it was during that time that I really started to implement the self-care practices that I maintain to this day in order to allow myself to be more present and more compassionate in my life and in my work. So I would just like to go over some of the goals and outcomes for this session. I would invite you to be present, to keep an open mind and heart, and most of all, enjoy this experience. My wish for you today is that you leave this session feeling more calm and equipped to take better care of yourself. So I think it's important to take a moment to acknowledge how difficult these past few weeks have been, and to name the fact that we are all feeling a collective sense of grief. Grief over projects that have been postponed, grief over lost employment and financial uncertainty, grief over feeling isolated, grief over having to homeschool our kids and trying to get to work at the same time, grief over elders in our community who are feeling particularly vulnerable, and grief over the fact that things feel just so uncertain. I think it's important to really acknowledge this grief and to also resist the idea that we need to be productive at this time. I've been seeing so much on social media lately about using this time to learn a new language, to finally write that novel, to take up a new hobby, etc. And I want to say that it's perfectly okay to resist these messages. So much of what I encounter in the world of wellness is about this constant need for self-improvement and productivity. There's this idea floating around that we have to overachieve, even in the midst of a global pandemic. Personally, these things affect me deeply, not only as a woman, but as a racialized person. But I'm learning to unlearn all these ideas around perfection and this idea of being stressed as a badge of honor. All this to say, I want you to know that just getting by right now is totally okay. Lowering expectations and being kind to yourself is particularly vital during these difficult times of COVID-19. I like this image because it seems to me that the sitting monk fundamentally understands that slowing down is a form of self-care and a form of productivity. So let's talk about self-care. I really like this quote by Audre Lorde, which says, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare." Okay, so I need to confess something right now. I have a big issue with the term self-care because I feel as though it has come to mean everything and nothing. Somewhere along the way, we've totally forgotten that the term self-care originated in African American feminist circles over 30 years ago. When Audre Lorde talked about self-care as an act of political warfare, it was a battle cry against the injustices that she was facing in 1987 and that still very much exist to this day. Audre Lorde was a queer Black woman, and for her to speak up and say, "I matter, I come first," talking about what I need and what I want was a radical act because it went against everything that she had been conditioned to believe. And I think that Audre Lorde understood that looking after herself was one of the ways in which she could fight against oppressive and broken systems. So it's been really disheartening for me to witness the fact that self-care has come to mean spa days and scented candles and mani-pedis. Now, don't get me wrong, I enjoy those things just as much as anyone. But when I think of self-care, it's not necessarily a glamorous thing. Because let's face it, the scented candle might make you feel better temporarily, but it's not really going to address your bigger problems. My concept of self-care is not one that is filled with quick fixes. To me, Self-care is actually kind of unglamorous and unsexy. It means really digging deep and looking at the things in my life that are messy and complicated. It means getting comfortable with all the stories floating around in my head. And it means really accepting myself and loving myself in a radical way. So, as we move along in this session, I want you to keep in mind that the term self-care is a lot more complex than what late-stage capitalism has led us to believe. Okay, so what is self-care? It's the practice of taking action to preserve or improve your own health. Self-care is deliberate, it's enjoyable, it's good for mental, emotional, and physical health. It improves our mood, reduces anxiety, and strengthens our relationship. And I think it's important to note here that often you can only help others if you start with yourself first. And just as important as it is to think about what self-care is, it's important to think about what self-care is not. And self-care is not forced, and it's not selfish, and it doesn't deplete. So it doesn't take away from us, but rather it resources us. And why should we practice self-care? Because we are confronted by such challenging aspects in our lives. We are asked to do more with less and to work and live with so much uncertainty, especially right now. And this can lead to stress, it can test our patience, and push us to our limits. Self-care helps us to cognitively, physically, and emotionally bounce back each day over the long term. So I'd like to now go over the different aspects of self-care. And the first aspect that I'd like to talk about is physical self-care. So these are activities that help you to stay healthy and provide energy to get through your work and your personal commitments. And I think we all know by now that good sleep, nutrition, and exercise are really important. And I want to pause here and say that when I talk about exercise, I mean just moving throughout the day and not beating yourself up if you haven't walked 10,000 steps or done an hour of intense cardio. I'm talking about things like going for a walk, playing with your kids, doing some gardening. And I would also invite you to spend more time just being with yourself and your body, feeling into it and paying attention to what it needs because it's so important. I find that we're pretty disconnected from our bodies. And one practice that my colleague, who's a therapist, taught me that was really eye-opening is next time you need to make a decision in your life, whether big or small, rather than focusing on what's going on in your mind, ask yourself, is this a body yes or a body no? When we turn our attention to the signals our body is sending us, I promise you we'll start to make better life decisions. And speaking of body wisdom, I would encourage you all to engage in activities that allow you to be playful and activities that take you out of your comfort zone. Being playful is so good for the body and so good for the mind as well. I took a dance and choreography class this past winter, and during each session, I was totally in the moment, and it was the most wonderful mental break. So find playful activities that you love to do so that you can fall back on them in moments of difficulty. Now I'd like to teach you a breathing technique, and this is called 4-7-8 breathing. And I would invite you to actually all do this with me. So I would invite you to Sit up straight in your chair and get comfortable. Maybe notice what's going on in your shoulders. If they're a little bit hunched, you might want to relax them. You might want to notice what's happening with your tongue. Is it stuck to the roof of your mouth? If it is, you might want to relax it. You might want to relax your jaw. And if you feel comfortable, I would invite you to close your eyes. And what we're going to do is we are going to breathe through the nose for a count of 4. We're going to hold the breath for a count of 7. And we will be exhaling for a count of 8. And as you exhale, I would invite you to make a sound with your mouth, like a kind of sound. So if you feel comfortable, we can do this together. So we're going to inhale for a count of 4 through the nose. And we're going to hold for 7. And we're going to exhale for 8. One more time. Inhale for 4. Hold for 7. And exhale for 8. And I would invite you to do that one more time. So Dr. Andrew Weil calls this technique a natural tranquilizer for the nervous system and believes it relieves anxiety, helps a person get to sleep, and reduces anger. So I do 4-7-8 breathing throughout the day. And it's one of the things that I do before going to sleep at night. Sometimes people have a hard time holding their breath for 7 seconds. So you can also just play around with the timing. So rather than 4-7-8, for example, you could do 2-4-6. The next aspect of self-care that I'd like to talk about is psychological self-care. And these are activities that help you feel clear-headed and provide you with an ability to intellectually engage with challenges in your work and in your personal life. And I would also add that it's important to just check in with yourself throughout the day to figure out what you need at any given moment so that you can make adjustments as necessary. One of the things that has been so useful to me is to write in a journal. And I resisted doing it for many years until I finally decided to get over myself. And now it's something that I really love doing. So every morning I wake up and I spend about 10 minutes doing some free writing. And then I write down the answers to these 3 questions. I will let go of, I am grateful for, I will focus on. And I find that doing that every morning really sets the tone for the rest of my day. And so why do we journal? Why do we write? Psychologist and researcher James Pennebaker believes that writing about stressful events helps you to come to terms with them, therefore reducing the impact of these stressors on your life and on your health. And here are some quarantine questions that I have been asking myself lately. And I invite you to write down some answers in the chat box if you feel like doing so. And I'll pause after each one of these questions to give you some time to either reflect or jot down some answers in the chat box. So the first question is, what am I grateful for today? And the second question is, who am I checking in on or connecting with today? What expectations of quote unquote normal am I letting go of today? How am I getting outside today? How am I moving my body today? And what beauty am I either creating, cultivating, or inviting in today? And so I find these questions really useful to reflect on because I find that they're like little targets that I try to hit throughout the day. Because of what's been going on with the global pandemic, sometimes there doesn't feel like there's a lot of structure to the day or rhyme or reason to the day. Sometimes the days feel like they're blending into each other lately. So I find just to pause and think about these questions really provides me with a feeling of groundedness and really makes me think about, okay, here are some things that will provide me with a little bit of structure throughout my day. And it'll just make me feel better. And I just want to add here, other things that have helped my psychological self-care lately is to really simplify my relationship with social media, asking for help if I'm feeling overwhelmed, and especially important, I would say, is to establish better boundaries, especially now with so many of us working from home. The lines have become more blurry around when the workday begins and when it ends. I personally find myself negotiating boundaries around space when space is at such a premium right now in my home. And one of the things that I've started to do in terms of communicating more effectively is practicing this. And that is say yes when I mean yes, say no when I mean no, say I don't know when I don't know. And I'm just going to repeat those because I find they're really useful. So say yes when you mean yes, say no when you mean no, say you don't know when you don't know. And the next aspect of self-care is emotional self-care. And that is to allow yourself to safely experience your full range of emotions. Emotions are information, so be curious about them without judgment. Rather than always defaulting to, why is this happening to me? Think instead, what is this trying to teach me? And I'll add here that it's important to remember that suppressing emotions is a surefire way to cause emotional distress. One of the things that I've had to learn in my own life is that when difficult things happen, it's important to sit with the feelings of discomfort and become curious about them rather than constantly being in a big rush to feel quote unquote normal again. So this idea sometimes that the only way over is through. And here are just some prompts for self-care. So self-care today, if you feel overwhelmed, then you need to take a step back. When you're stressed, focus on relaxing. If you're anxious, practice a coping skill. If you're sad, be more loving to yourself. When you're feeling angry, find a positive outlet. If you're drained, make sure to rest and recharge. Moments when you feel broken, practice a lot of self-compassion. If you're upset, take time for yourself. And if you're feeling alone, reach out for support. I'd like to teach you something else now, and this is called the Choose Again method. And this is a technique to stop the spiral of negative thoughts. And this is something that I learned from someone named Gabby Bernstein. Gabby Bernstein is an author, a motivational speaker, and a coach, and she's published a number of books. And this is her method, and it's called the Choose Again method. So the way that it works is the first step is that you would notice the anxious thought, and you would ask yourself, how do I feel right now? Followed by, where does this feeling manifest in my body? And the next step would be to forgive yourself for the fearful thought and to tell yourself, I am not that thought, and celebrate your desire to shift. And then the last step in this method is to choose a thought that holds a better feeling for you and reach for the thoughts that feel good. So an example of this could be, okay, so Vesna, how do you feel right now? And I might say, I notice that I'm feeling lonely and cut off from the world because of COVID-19. And maybe I might even jot down some reflections on that in a journal, for example. And where does that feeling manifest in my body? Usually I feel stress in my chest. So I may feel a tightening in my chest. I might feel some tension in my shoulders. And then I would forgive myself. And I would say, I forgive myself for being misaligned. And I would celebrate my desire to shift. And I would say to myself, I'm not these thoughts. I could even say to myself, thank you, negative feelings and thoughts, for showing me what I don't want and revealing to me what I do. And choose again. So what would be the next best feeling thought that I could choose right now? It could be something like, social distancing is a way to help others that are more vulnerable than I am. And the next best feeling thought after that could be, I'm never truly alone. And the next best thought could be, I can still connect with loved ones virtually. And the next best thought could be, maybe I can turn social isolation into an opportunity for self-discovery, et cetera, et cetera. So you get an idea of how this method works. I invite you again to do this throughout the day, especially if you feel like those negative thoughts are really spiraling in your mind. And the last aspect of self-care that I'd like to talk about is spiritual self-care. And this is having a sense of perspective beyond the day-to-day of life. And for me personally, one of the ways in which I tend to my spirit is through meditation. And, why do we meditate? And for me, I meditate to become more familiar with my mind. But I also meditate because it benefits people around me, right? Because when you do the work of healing yourself, it means that you don't need to impose your work on other people. I'm going to say that one more time because it's important. When you do the work of healing yourself, it means that you don't need to impose your work on other people. For those of you who are new to meditating, I would say start small. A couple of minutes a day is enough. Focus on your breathing and just really stay with whatever arises for you. And don't get so wrapped up in this idea that you're not doing it right or that somehow you're not good at it. Just trying and sitting with your breath for a few minutes a day is a really great starting point. Some of the benefits of meditation makes life more harmonious. It improves your memory. It's good to balance out emotions. It's good for your immune system. It reduces stress and depression. It regulates your heart rate. It increases happiness. It also gives a boost of energy. And I like this quote by this doctor who says, meditation helps us get out of our own way. And here's just a list of some meditation apps that I find particularly helpful. My personal favorite is one that's called Stop, Breathe, and Think. But I also really like Calm and Headspace and Insight Timer. Another way to have a sense of perspective beyond the day-to-day of life is to be in nature and to think about the ways in which we can create a more harmonious relationship with it. And I wanted to put up this slide too because yesterday was Earth Day. So again, it's always important to think about our relationship with the natural world. So who do I want to be during the COVID-19 crisis? And I find this graphic does a really good job of capturing in clear ways the many responses we are all seeing in others and in ourselves these days. So are you in the fear zone, right? Are you grabbing food and toilet paper, and are you hoarding medication? Are you spreading emotions related to fear and anger? Are you constantly complaining? Are you forwarding all messages before even really reading them? Are you getting mad and impatient very easily? Are you in the learning zone? Are you starting to give up what you can't control? Are you not compulsively consuming what hurts you? Are you labeling your emotions? Are you identifying them? Are you becoming aware of the situation and how to think and act? Are you being critical about the information that you're receiving before then spreading something false? Are you recognizing that what we are all doing is just trying our best right now? Or are you entering into the growth zone? And the growth zone would be, I think of others and I think about how to help them. I make my talents available to those who need them. Are you living in the present and in the moment? And are you focused on the future? Are you being empathetic with yourself and with others? Are you thankful and appreciative? Are you trying to maintain a good emotional state that spreads hope? Are you looking for a new way to adapt to these new changes? Are you practicing being quiet and patient? Are you cultivating relationships? Are you developing some creativity? So I would say ask yourself, what zone or zones are you in at this point? And I would also invite you to ask yourself, what do you need to do to move yourself into the growth zone if you're not in it right now? So self-care, as you probably know by now, is a very complex thing. And I think in addressing the complexity of self-care, we need to become aware of the different levels of care that exist. So at the bottom, we have self-soothing, right? So these are activities that provide comfort during difficult times. So those are things like what I alluded to earlier. So the baths, the massage, Netflix, and these are good things, but they do not stabilize you or really help you move forward. And then we move up, and that's where we have self-care. And as you know, these are the activities that help you find meaning and that support your growth and your groundedness. Next, we have community care. This means having systems in place that support community. So that would be things like childcare, parental leave, supportive healthcare organizations, relationships outside of traditional romantic ones. And I'd like to point out here too that sometimes when we think of healing, we think of it as a very individual thing, but a lot of healing also takes place in community, and it's important to mention that. And finally, we have structural care, And that's really the umbrella that facilitates all the other aspects of care. And these are really the systems in place that support self-soothing, self-care, and community care. So examples of this would be things like comprehensive universal health care, child and elder care, environmental protection, efficient public transportation, paid family leave. So I wanted to circle back to this slide because by now we all understand that self-care is a multifaceted thing. I mentioned at the beginning of this session that I have issues with the word self-care. So maybe, just maybe, instead of calling it self-care, maybe we call it self-love instead. Because to me, self-love is accepting that healing is possible, even in a society that constantly fosters insecurity. Loving who you are means giving yourself permission to cherish your authenticity and forgive the times that you forgot your own power. Rather than worrying about exhibiting the best version of yourself, loving yourself means accepting the complexity of who you are, which includes the fact that who you are can change, that your past does not define your future. And I think that's the act of political warfare that Audre Lorde wanted us to practice all along. That recognition that loving yourself means choosing a more empowered narrative about where you are and where you want to be. So you might be wondering to yourself, so how do I begin to look after how do I begin to look after myself, Vesna? And I can't stress enough the importance of keeping small promises to yourself daily. So things like 3 minutes of journaling, 2 minutes of meditation, 1 minute of breathing, a 5-minute walk, devices off at 9 p.m., drinking 1 glass of water. And these promises, they're so small, right? Like they seem almost insignificant. But if you trust yourself and you put in the work every day, I promise you, it will change your life. And I'd like to take a moment to read to you a poem that my professor shared in class when I was doing my coaching certificate program at Concordia. And it's called Autobiography in 5 Short Chapters by Portia Nelson. Chapter 1, I walk down the street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I am lost. I am helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. Chapter 2, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I still don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I am in the same place. It isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3, I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it there. I still fall in. It's a habit. It's my fault. I know where I am. I get out immediately. Chapter 4, I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5, I walk down a different street. So here's to choosing that different street to walk on. Here's to realizing that even in the midst of what feels like the apocalypse, we can still find joy, we can still find laughter, we can still find purpose. And let's face it, I think we've all at some point wished that the world would slow down just a little. So my challenge to you is to use this time as an invitation to reflect on what you're learning about yourself so that you can start to set intentions for how you want to be when this is all over. My wish for you today is that you use these discoveries to create a roadmap for how you want to lead your new life. And I'll just close off by saying that if you could use an ally in creating that roadmap, or if you or your organization could benefit from my personal and professional coaching services, my contact information is listed on this slide. I would love to hear from you and figure out how best to support you on your journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vesna. I know that, or you know that I love this presentation, and one of the comments that we received from Sylvia is that your approach is very relaxing and soothing. So already you're making all of us feel better. So thank you so much. So I'm going to jump in with some of our earlier comments and then some questions that we're getting from participants. So first of all, thank you to everyone who participated. We have, just about 130 people on with us right now. So that's really wonderful. And thank you all for participating so actively in the chat box. It's so great to see. Some of the comments that we were getting in terms of what people are grateful for right now. A lot of us are saying we're grateful for having good health at a time like this. We're grateful for our friends and family and for their health. Patricia said that she's grateful for her loving pets. And I know that I could definitely benefit from a furry buddy at this time. And Carboni and actually Steve mentioned as well that they're grateful for this webinar. So thank you to you guys for expressing that. In terms of what people are doing to stay active, a lot of us are trying to get outside, going for walks, doing yoga. Patricia said that she's running 10K. So wow, Patricia, maybe we'll need to get you on here to talk about running, motivation for running. And a number of people are staying active indoors, learning to cook more, and obviously just doing some household cleaning. I'm on that bandwagon as well. In terms of some questions that we've been getting, Adil and a couple other of our participants have expressed that they're teachers and that their normal has changed drastically, and that they are having to engage and teach their students through a new online process that they're not yet comfortable with necessarily. And so that this transition to their new normal is now preventing them from getting that physical activity, being able to have that time outside. So what is your recommendation, or if you have any advice for Adil and our other participants who are struggling to balance their new day-to-day normal and ensuring that they are getting that physical activity in, or physical self-care in?
Yeah, so I would say it's just really important to establish some routines. Like I mentioned before, things feel really unstructured right now and very unfamiliar. So I think if you can just commit to small daily practices, whether that's 15, 20 minutes of exercise, whether that is taking a few breaths throughout the day when you're feeling overwhelmed. So I can't stress enough the importance of just a bit of structure and just a bit of a routine to the day. And for the professors that are on this session, I would say it's okay to sort of lean into your vulnerability and to say, this is all unfamiliar to me. I'm not an expert at Zoom. I've never had to face moving my classes to an online platform. And it's okay. I think often professors are seen as kind of experts at what they're doing. But this idea of just leaning into the discomfort of not knowing is absolutely okay, because I think we could all use a dose of just being kinder to ourselves at this moment. And if there are moments in the day when you don't get around to some of the things that you want to do, I would say just cut yourself some slack as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Vesna. Gabriella, to start, she says, earlier on, she appreciated your comment about not feeling the pressure to be too overproductive at a time like this. And you don't have to pick up a hobby. You don't have to master a new discipline. So she acknowledges and thanks you for that. Her question, so she said on the slide where you ask, who do you want to be during COVID-19? She says that she finds herself in a little bit of each of the stages. So she finds herself a little bit in zone 1, a little bit in zone 2, and a little bit in zone 3. What advice do you have for Gabriella and the others on our webinar today that are working towards getting to the growth zone?
Yeah, I mean, I think chances are that throughout the day, we find ourselves in all 3 of those zones. Maybe we can be in all 3 of those zones on an hourly basis, right? So again, I think we don't have experience with what we're currently dealing with, and everything is so new, and everything feels really uncertain. So I would say, again, I think just asking yourself the question of like, where am I at right now? What zone am I in? Just asking yourself, like, what do I need, right? I don't think we're in the habit of doing that. We're not in the habit of checking in with ourselves and just sort of saying, what am I feeling? Like, what is my body telling me, right? So I think that practice of just becoming aware is really empowering and just really good. So I think just asking the question, and then being okay with not necessarily having an answer, and just know that whatever question you're asking yourself is helping you to move towards that growth and that learning zone.
Wonderful. Thank you, Vesna. And I know you touched on this when you were answering Adel's question, but it's coming up more and more. What advice do you have for people who want to have more long-term self-care practices? So just ensuring that they stick, and that it's not just about ending this webinar and then having one good day where you practice a number of self-care webinars, but really incorporating it into your everyday routine for the long term.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll repeat it again, right? So making daily commitments to yourself is just so key. And I think it's also a question of discovering what it is that feels right for you and what you like to do, right? So I talked about meditation, I talked about journaling. That is not something that everyone necessarily gravitates towards, right? So it's about identifying, like, what are your touchstones, right? Like, what are the things that you need to rely on in order to, like, just generally feel better? And so, like I said, when life throws you curveballs and when things are difficult, you have those coping mechanisms that are healthy to fall back on, right? So it's not necessarily about like drinking more, and it's not necessarily about eating more. It's about, these are the things that really nourish me and support me. And I find myself, my actual self-care routine, on the days that I don't do it, I feel like something is missing, right? So I've really come to depend on my self-care practices in order to allow me to function in a way that feels good for me, right? In order for me to be a good mother, in order for me to be a good partner, in order for me to be a good coach, right? So like I said, it's not taking away from your life, it's actually adding to it. And I think I would say, like, you need to love yourself enough to feel that you deserve to be doing those things for yourself, right? And I think that's sort of the starting point, to sort of say, these are things that sustain me and nourish me, and they're almost deal breakers if I don't do them, right?
Oh, we'll take some time to talk about your coaching practices, and if participants are interested to learn more about coaching and what that entails, can you walk us through that a little bit?
I couldn't hear the beginning of your question. So you want to know more about coaching?
Exactly.
So I think people often are confused about, what's the difference between therapy and coaching? And I would say that coaching is really about supporting clients in achieving their goals and in becoming more empowered. In coaching, we're not necessarily looking at our clients' past. We're really sort of focused on trying to get them unstuck and trying to get them from point A to point B. To those of you who are in therapy, and I, of course, count myself among them, sometimes in therapy, what I find is not necessarily there is the integration piece, right? So you're in this fantastic therapy session and you walk out of the therapist's office and you're kind of wondering to yourself, okay, well, what now? Like I have these realizations and these insights, but I don't necessarily know how to apply them. And I feel as though coaching really kind of bridges that gap of saying, here are really practical ways in which you can achieve what it is that you want to achieve. The other thing that I really like about coaching is that a coaching relationship is dynamic and short, right? So it's not in the coach's best interest to have the client kind of stay with them long term. Like I want my clients to be kind of ready and up and moving in like 3 months, 6 months time. And I like that about coaching. I like that it's a little bit more directive. I like that it's short. And I like, one of the things for me as a coach is that I always think of my clients as really whole, capable, and resourceful people, right? So I'm never looking at my client as someone that I need to fix. Like I fundamentally know that my client has all the answers, and I'm just there to kind of facilitate and support their journey. So it's really this idea of having like a success and growth mindset rather than looking at someone and sort of trying to diagnose them. It's about, yeah, you already have all the answers. You're already resourced and equipped to get what you want in life. And I'm just here to kind of ask you questions, and I'm here to support you, and I'm here to hold you accountable, and I'm here to really kind of cheer you on. And I think, athletes have coaches. I think that everybody needs a coach. It's really like a transformative and empowering experience, and I highly recommend it. And another thing that I'll add too is that a lot of people call themselves coaches, but they don't necessarily have any kind of formal training or background in coaching, right? So for me personally, it was really important to go to school and get a coaching certification and to kind of learn about the theory behind the practice, right? So not to say that someone who doesn't have a coaching certification can't like provide good advice and provide mentorship, but if you are shopping around for a coach, it might be interesting to ask the question and sort of say, have you graduated from an accredited coaching program? And if you are shopping around for a coach too, I think it's important to ask that coach, like, what are you doing to kind of look after yourself, right? So for me as a coach, I have my own mentor coach. I have my therapist. Just because I'm a coach doesn't mean I'm an expert, that I have all the answers, right? So this idea that I'm constantly engaged in my own work of self-discovery, in my own healing journey, right? And that makes me a more effective coach. I wouldn't call myself a good coach if I wasn't like very actively engaged in those things myself.
Great. And for anybody who's interested to learn more about Vesna's coaching and her journey to coaching, all of her contact information is included on this final slide here. So do take that down. And I know, Vesna, that you're open to, continuing the dialogue with our participants today.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to send me an email, if you have any questions, I also offer like a free 20-minute discovery session. So if you want to find out more about my work and coaching and whether that's a right fit for you, then please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you.
Wonderful. So I do want to be mindful of everyone's time. So I will ask a final question. And this is from Layla, who is asking for a little clarification. So you mentioned earlier on about manifesting or cultivating and creating beauty. And so she just wants to know, what are some examples of that beauty that you're referencing?
Right. So there's this book. It's called The Artist's Way. It's by Julia Cameron. And Julia Cameron talks about taking yourself out on an artist date, right? So in non-global pandemic times, that would be doing something on your own that really stimulates your senses. So whether that is going to an art gallery, whether that's taking out some paints and doing some painting, whether that is doing some dancing, right? So things that are nourishing your kind of artistic sensibility, right? And I realize that now in the current circumstances, it's a little bit difficult to like walk to the museum or go to the gallery. So I would say, whatever you do that engages your senses on a totally different level, right? Whatever you can do that sparks your imagination. I know that a lot of the museums and galleries right now are offering virtual tours. I know that a lot of libraries are offering, again, tours of their libraries and their resources. So basically, anything that you can find throughout the day that is just stimulating that kind of lovely artistic sensibility that we all fundamentally have, right? Like I firmly believe that we are all artistic, right? So whatever you choose to do that just sort of stimulates that. And that can be found even while you're taking a walk, right? Like just pay attention to what you see, just pay attention to the colors, the light of the sky, right? All those things are kind of stimulating you in a really wonderful way. So just pay attention to the beauty around you. I don't think we have that instinct to just stop and reflect and look and say, oh, wow, I never noticed that. It's actually so wonderful.
Lovely. Thank you, Vesna. And thank you to all of you who took time out of your day to join us. We are so pleased to have a Concordia alumna leading the conversation with us on this topic. As I said, we will be emailing you all a recording of this session. So for those of you who asked questions about going back to certain slides, you'll have access to the recording of this presentation. And we truly appreciate your feedback. So please do let us know if this webinar met your expectations. Leave a comment in the chat box. Or feel free to send me an email at olivia.picciarelli@concordia.ca. Again, to connect with Vesna and to continue the conversation, you can visit www.coachvesna.com or send her an email as well. We are pleased to be able to continue to bring you valuable virtual content, so keep your eyes peeled for our email invitations. We have weekly content for you and for your family at this time. Tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Montreal time, we are offering our second yoga session for families with Yasmin, and we hope to see you there. Christina will be on that panel tomorrow. And next week, Alice, you asked if we're doing any more sessions on COVID-19. Next Wednesday, April 29th, we have a webinar on leading through meaningful change. So being able to manage the change that we're all going through today. So I wish you all a fantastic rest of the day. Do continue to join us on these wonderful sessions. Thank you so much again to you, Vesna and Christina. Stay safe and stay strong. Bye, everyone.